Your story matters, let it be told. When everything
Hi, and welcome
changes,
to When Stories, the podcast. Today I have Michelle Vande with me, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and share her story with you. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks for having me. So, I'm Michelle Vande, and I'm going to share a story of when everything changed for me. And my story is really about realizing that motivation wasn't enough and it isn't really enough to accomplish goals and do big things. And so, a little bit of backstory before I kind of get into that story is I've always been a person, I'm like a self help super fan. I love self help books. I've got a stack of books behind me, I've got a stack of books that I haven't read yet. I've got my list of audiobooks that I have yet to listen to, and I love getting suggestions for new books and podcasts. So I love learning and growing in that way. And it's just something I've always really enjoyed. And then part of that is also personality quizzes, learning about yourself, the Enneagram, and then the Myers-Briggs. And then another one that I've done is the Clifton Strengths Finders. And the interesting thing about that for me is my number one strength is positivity. And so I always thought, like in my life, I always felt like, yes, like motivation, you just need motivation and you can do anything. Well, that changed for me. And when that changed, it started when my son died in October of 2018. And that completely changed my life. And a big part of it is I experienced depression, PTSD, and anxiety. And I had never experienced anything like that before in my life. I was always someone who, if I got down a little bit, I could just like pick myself back up. And this was something that I just like couldn't pick myself back up from anymore. So about 6 months after he died, I got to this breaking point of my coping mechanisms were binge eating to, eat my feelings and eat my emotions. And I was also really taking out a lot of what I was going through on my daughter. Her and I were just arguing all the time, and not just arguments. It was like yelling and screaming matches. And at the time, my daughter was 5 years old. And I just, even saying that out loud, it just makes me feel so terrible to think like an adult would have a yelling match with a 5 year old. But that's where like my mental health was at the time. And I couldn't get myself out of it. I couldn't get back to the person that would wake up at 5 a.m. with relative ease and go exercise and journal and meditate and do all of those morning things that I loved doing and like winning my morning. I couldn't get myself out of bed anymore. I was like, I want to get out of bed, but I literally just can even remember back then where I would just peel myself out of bed. My feet would hit the floor and I would just get myself out of bed as slowly as possible. But usually it wasn't at 5 a.m. It was like, what is the latest I can sleep in to get myself up and to get my daughter up to get her to school? And then I would come home and oftentimes go back to bed. So I just became this person I didn't recognize. And so when everything really changed was about 6 months later. So it was spring of 2019. And my husband told me he signed up for a 5K. And I was really confused because I became a runner as an adult about 3 years prior. I was I was motivated and inspired by my nephew to become a runner. And in those years, because my husband was a runner as a high school athlete, I was like, you should run with me. Like, let's run races together. It'd be fun to do something together. He never had a desire to do that. And so he decided to sign up for this 5K. And I was confused, but then it made me think maybe I should sign up for a 5K too, because I'm a fair weather runner, so I only run when it's nice enough out to run outside. I don't like to run on treadmills, so I was pretty much spring to fall is when I would run. And in the previous years, becoming a runner as an adult, I ran several 5Ks. And then I was inspired by people around me to run a couple 10Ks. They didn't really go as well as I would have liked them to have gone, but I share that because I decided I would sign up for a 5K because that was part of who I was a runner. And I thought this is going to help me to find myself again. And so I went to sign up for the 5K, which is about is 3 miles. And there was an option to also run a 10K. Mind you, this is a completely different race than my husband was running. He didn't want to run a race with me, but I went to sign it up and there was a 10K option, and it made me pause and made me really realize maybe I should sign up for this 10K instead of the 5K. Because I realized at that point in my life, even with everything I went through in the previous 6 months, that signing up for a 5K wouldn't really change my life enough. I was doing this because I needed a catalyst to change what I was doing. And because I had run enough 5Ks in the past, I felt like I could run a week ahead of time a few times and feel okay running a 5K. But I knew that if I wanted to run a 10K, which is a little over 6 miles, for me, that's like running a marathon. Like that is really challenging and something that takes a lot of effort. I have to pay attention to my nutrition. I have to pay attention to my exercise routine and all of that. And so I signed up for that 10K. And after it, I really realized I was writing this newsletter at the time, and I was going back and forth about this 5K, 10K, and I realized there was something deeper with signing up for that 10K. And that's when I realized that I needed to stop trying to rely on motivation to help me to get out of bed. I needed to stop relying on motivation to help me to feel better. I needed to stop relying on motivation to when I was in the basement eating at night. It was like there was nothing like even though I wanted to feel better, even though I wanted to feel healthier, it wasn't enough when I was eating. I would be like, I don't care. And so the motivation wasn't enough for me anymore. And so I needed that 10K to wake me up a little bit. And a big part of that was my why behind it. And many people talk about your why. And oftentimes, especially as parents, we often say our why is our kids. I would challenge everyone to ask themselves, why is your child or your children your why? Because when I look back at when I signed up for that 10K, initially it was I wanted to feel healthy again. But like I said, when I was trying to get myself out of bed, when I was trying to stop myself from eating a whole bag of chips or a whole thing of Oreos, that wasn't enough. And so I had to ask myself again, well, why do I want to feel healthy again? And it was because I didn't want to feel depressed anymore because I didn't feel like myself. And so then I asked, like, why didn't I want to feel depressed anymore? It's because I wanted to feel like myself again. Why did I want to feel like myself again? Because I didn't want to be the parent that I was becoming. And the real reason was I didn't want my relationship with my daughter to be a terrible relationship. I wanted to be close with my daughter. I wanted us to have a close relationship. I wanted her to grow up knowing that she could come to me for anything. And even still, it chokes me up a little bit. And so that's why I signed up for that 10K. And I didn't realize it at the time that that was what I was asking myself of why I signed up for it. But that's really why. And so that's something that I often share with people because it's so important to get to that burning, driving desire why. And it's so easy to stop at that first answer of I want to feel healthy again. Well, that's great, but that wasn't what was getting me out of bed. And so I signed up for that 10K, and I didn't just instantly start getting out of bed at 5 a.m. I didn't instantly stop binge eating. But what it helped me to do was get out of bed a few days a week. Not usually at 5 a.m., but early enough to do something. It got me to start doing something different. Like it was that catalyst that moved me to do something different. It was that voice in the back of my head when I was sitting in the basement eating to tell me to stop eating. It was actually what helped me to instill my husband and say, I don't want to do this anymore. If you see me eating, will you just ask me, are you sure you want to be eating that? And I gave him permission to do that because I told him I don't want to do it anymore, but I can't even stop myself. And we, at the time too, I was seeing a therapist, we were seeing a family therapist. There was all sorts of other support, but this 10K was that catalyst that really kind of brought everything together. And I'm also happy to report that I then, started working out regularly. I started eating better. It wasn't perfect, but it helped me to get on that path. And it was the best 10K I ever ran. I got my personal best. So at the end of that race, I got to ring that personal best bell, which was amazing. I have the most amazing picture. It felt so good. Just like feeling the emotion now viscerally. It was like the biggest accomplishment. It felt like the biggest accomplishment of my life because I was starting to feel like myself again. And so I was able to run that 10K, get my personal best. I've never run a 10K since. I don't really have a desire to. It's so interesting how it served a purpose for me and how it really helped me to find myself again. And it was also the catalyst that got me into coaching. It was the catalyst that made me realize that I wanted to help other people to feel like themselves again. I started out as a health coach at the end of 2019. And then at the beginning of 2020, I became certified as a holistic life coach. I started helping women after the loss of a child. And then in 2023, I got certified as a trauma sensitive yoga facilitator. And since then, I've been really focusing on helping folks prioritize themselves so they can continue to power their mission. Because that was a big part of what I did. I wanted to have a great relationship with my daughter. So that was my mission. But it started with prioritizing myself and my needs that really got me there. And a big piece of that was not relying on motivation, relying on a deep, burning, driving desire why that was deeper than the mission, but also about my own personal why, which obviously at that time, my mission and my why and my personal was very intertwined, which most people, their mission and their personal life are intertwined. So that was a big piece of it. And then the other piece was really taking care of myself and realizing that in order for me to help my family, because my daughter wasn't necessarily doing well at the time either. And in order for me to help her, I needed to help myself first or alongside of it. And that it didn't have to be either or. I didn't have to sacrifice myself to help my daughter. I could help myself and help my daughter at the same time. And so that was really the catalyst that got me into what I'm doing now today with helping folks to prioritize themselves and to really help create this wave of change in the world of not sacrificing yourself for your mission and really continuing to create the change that you want to see in the world by creating that change within yourself first. So that's my story.
Let it be told.